Specialists without spirit, sensualists without heart. This nullity imagines that it has attained a level of civilization never before achieved. Welcome to Sunday Reads with Joel. My name is Joel, and that is a quote from Max Weber from The Protestant, Work Ethic, and the Spirit of Capitalism. So today, it's going to be a short review, and I sent out a question on Instagram about the difference between a workaholic and a hard worker. I've been thinking about this because we've been having team effectiveness sessions, and we've been talking at my workplace about how to make people more efficient, how we can be more humane in the way we work. And there seemed to be an issue around how bureaucratic things are. We all felt sort of caged in by the institution. We want to do our work, but we feel that the very things about work, the policies, the committees, all those things tend to get into the way. And it reminded me of this book. This is a work by the sociologist Max Weber, and just, three takeaways from it that I wanted to share with you guys. The first one, though, would link back to the responses I got to that workaholic versus hard worker piece. Most people were saying something along the lines of a workaholic only derives pleasure from doing work. It's almost an impulse. It's just they work because they use it as either distraction or a means of fulfilling themselves, and don't have time for anything else. It becomes the most important thing for them. But they say a hard worker, does what's necessary to get the job done, but then can leave it alone. But there's such a minuscule difference between those two, because who's judging? A workaholic can get a lot of work done as well. And probably at the workplace, HR might say, well, you shouldn't work so hard, but will encourage it. They will encourage in other ways for you to ever be present, for you to give 110%, for you not to be distracted. And so I think there's a blurring of those lines. And the first point that I want to take, and I get from the book, is the thesis that Weber has, is that for the first time in human history, we are people that look at our work as a calling, that we the Puritans, for instance, he says, the Puritans wanted their life to have a calling. We have to have a calling, because you're born into a system and you're maximizing choices. You have choices that you have to make. Those choices are only fueled by money, and the way you get money is through gainful employment. You're going to spend most of your life doing work. Now, for the average person, a medieval person or a farmer, they were also doing work, but it was a necessary evil. It was a thing you got through just to sustain yourself. Even if you take the quote of Jesus, where he says, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar and give to God what belongs to God. There was a separation between those two ideas. It was a curse, actually, in the Bible, for you to have to work. We look at it as work as a way of fulfilling ourselves, as a way of your identity is tied to that. And so you have to find a career and a calling. So there's an immense amount of pressure on you, as opposed to it being for survival just. It is also a matter of character. You're looked at as a terrible person if you're not grinding away, if you're not hustling away. Even if, say, you were able to do a few hours worth of work and be able to sustain yourself, you'd almost be seen as a leech. The machine has to keep going. And guess what feeds that machine? Us, our time, our effort, our energies. And so there's a market difference. He's talking about a market difference in the way we operate, that through the process of rationalisation, which was us trying to figure out how to control nature, us putting rules in place to make efficiency happen. Once that became the norm, we, became sort of people who would subjugate ourselves. We start to look at ourselves as having a calling, as having that a good person does these things, and you make yourself voluntarily a cog in a machine. One of the quotes that I really like from it is, the fate of our times is characterized by rationalization and intellectualization, and above all, by the disenchantment of the world. Now, I've felt this personally as I've gone through work. I've been quite successful, but with every step, there's a lost enchantment with the world, because everything, there are numbers for everything, there's an order, there's a process, and we try and calculate everything. We try and calculate cooperation, we try and calculate even intangibles. We want to grab hold of the world, and that has sort of caused the disenchantment from me. For a lot of the work that I do, I have to remind myself why I'm in it. And I think this is why we also have these sessions of team effectiveness, of having joy, why every job description they must be passionate, they must have a reason why, because there's something about the way we work that drains out the color from the things that we're doing. So we're specialists. Without spirit, probably you started on this journey when you had a spirit of you want to help people, you want to learn, you want to do some things creatively, and then you join a big successful organization, and you're now being told exactly how to do things. A lot of the choices you make are more about how do I go through the rules, how do I efficiently maximize output, and not so much about how you express yourself as an individual. Your role, for instance, doesn't, you're called to equate yourself and to bring all of yourself to your role. But then if you think about it, that role exists with or without you. I was the country manager at Jumo. If I made the mistake of thinking that country manager Jumo equals Joel, the day a new country manager was appointed, I would lose my identity. And that's the subtle trap that we're in, that sort of pouring all of ourselves and attaining a lot of meaning from work can leave us with something that can easily be shifted out from under us, and then we don't know who we are anymore. The second piece, so the first one was just about the changing of nature of work and how it has become a calling. The second is about the iron cage that we all seem to be under. Now, when he talks about the iron cage, it's almost like we have to follow rules, that there is an inevitability in the way things are organized, that you as an individual can't really think of changing anything. We are, it's almost like golden handcuffs. We have much more access than anyone could have ever dreamt of. You have access to so much more than your ancestors could have thought of. But that's because that's the tail end of production. Consumerism. We're encouraged to keep consuming, keep consuming, keep consuming. And as we keep consuming, probably you get less and less satisfaction. You have enjoyment in the moment, but you have to keep consuming. You have to move on to the next thing, and to the next thing, and to the next thing. And something about progress of that nature destroys any sort of firm foundation, any sort of orientation. I think about it when I look at movies and entertainment. Things don't last for a long time. Stranger Things comes out, it's big for 2 weeks, then the next thing comes out. Then the next thing comes out, then the next thing comes out. And I think we push back towards nostalgia because we remember something lasting. It sits for a while. You know, it didn't have to move to the next great thing. It just stays there for a while. Now, that might be the temptation of me being an old head and thinking things were better back then. That same thing was happening back then. It's just, it's getting much faster. This book was written in the early 1900s, and things just keep getting more and more rapid in terms of how things change so rapidly that it's hard for you to take a hold of anything. And so the only form of enjoyment is consumption. You just keep consuming. And perhaps that makes you a hedonist without passion. You're consuming, but you have to keep consuming because you feel there's an emptiness there. Now, the best example of an iron cage is bureaucracy. We strive for equality. We want to treat everyone equally. Now, the official way that can be done is by having rules in place that don't treat people differently, that treat us all the same. But if you think about, like, say, when you're going to the passport office, might have a special case where you have to fly to see a relative who might be ill, and so you want special treatment in that point in time. For the bureaucrat that you find, if that person was to treat you specially, we would call that corruption. And there's that, whatever progress we make, there's always a price that has to be paid. We say we want equality, and that's a good thing, according to Weber, we definitely need it, but it doesn't come for free. It means that the ways in which we put our hands to the plow to try and make that happen is that essentially we will be destroying or paying a price in some other facet. The system becomes much bigger than we are. We begin to serve it rather than it serving us. And the third thing that I want to say about the work ethic and and the spirit of capitalism, and the takeaway I have for work, modern work, is that, we've sort of reached a place where we have to be polytheistic. We have to believe a certain set of things at work, believe a certain set of things at home, believe a certain set of things probably at the country club, wherever it is that you're hanging out. And the ultimately possible, this is a quote from the book, the ultimately possible attitudes towards life are irreconcilable, and hence their struggle can never be brought to a final conclusion. You at work have to maximize return and profit. In your community, perhaps you maximize charity. Now, in your mind, you might think those two things don't go against each other. But think of the things you have to do. If you acted as you do in the community, trying to be kind and generous, if you did that at work, you'd probably be fired. If you acted like you do at work at home, you would probably be in trouble. And so as a human being, you sort of have to live with different values. And as long as you don't think too much about them, you have to believe in multiple gods. But if those things come into contact, that's where you feel the full friction of life. Whether you're going to treat other human beings as compassionate human beings going through this race of life, or are you seeing them as competitors? Are you going to see people as human resources for you to exploit, or are you seeing them as individuals with unique callings? This is the fate of our epoch. The fact that we've become so rationalized, we've separated different facets of life to be more efficient, but that separation means that it's very hard to bring all these things together, all the things that make sense for us together. And the most important one at the center is how we spend our time. Because we work to get money, and that money powers everything else that we do. But the things we have to do to get that money affect the way we enjoy ourselves. They affect the way we treat our families. They affect the way we think of each other. They affect even the esteem that we give to each other in saying that you're a hard worker, and that's a good thing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but it's an interesting thing for the first time in human history that we don't look at it as an essential thing for us to get done. And the last thing I'll say is, it seems that when we think about progress, a lot of this progress isn't necessarily for us. We feel more stressed. We work longer. We're pushing ourselves much harder, with the promise that somehow it will all be worth it. Somehow it will be good for someone. And what it's good for is the machinery. What it's good for is the business world. And so I guess my message is, just think about that. Think about how you can become a cog or a thing, and maybe try and relax. Try and see which values make sense. You might pay a price for them. I don't yet have an answer. All I know is that I don't want to become an unthinking thing, to become a guy who goes along to get along. And sometimes that may mean friction with the current system. But, what's life without a little bit of friction? Have a nice Sunday.